Welcome to another Wellness Wednesday. This week I wanted to talk about a couple of measurements that we can utilize to help us understand our health that doesn't require us to step on a scale. Because as I've talked about many times, our weight isn't necessarily as good of an indicator of our physical health as we once thought it was. So two of the things that I will talk about have to do with your cardiovascular health. So the first one is our resting heart rate. Our resting heart rate is a measurement of how fit our cardiovascular system is. The more fit you are, the lower your resting heart rate. So our heart, as we become more cardiovascularly fit, our heart becomes more efficient. It can pump better, it's stronger, so it doesn't need to beat as many times in a minute to pump as much blood. When we want to measure our resting heart rate, the best time to do that is right away in the morning, before you've even gotten out of bed. Then we get a better representation of what that actual resting heart rate is. If you have a fitness watch, I have two, you can look at those. They're not the most accurate, but they do give you a really good indication of what that resting heart rate is. Because our most accurate one is actually while we're sleeping, but it's hard to measure because we're sleeping. And a healthy resting heart rate is anywhere between 60 and 100 beats per minute. The more fit you are, it could be even lower than 60, but a healthy range is that 60 to 100 beats per minute. The second cardiovascular measurement is our blood pressure. It is a little bit harder to measure because you need a device for that, but most pharmacies have a blood pressure cuff that you can sit in and utilize. You can also buy a blood pressure cuff that goes on your wrist. Following the instructions, it's a pretty accurate measurement. With our blood pressure, we want to think of that as the pressure that our heart has to beat against in order to pump blood throughout our body. So the higher that pressure is, the more work our heart has to do even at rest. And so if we think about how much work our heart has to do throughout the day with every beat, the more it does, the weaker it ends up becoming, because our heart can only work so hard. It's a muscle. So if we think about how, like lifting weights, the heavier you lift, the less reps you can do. So we think about our heart and how much it has to work against that pressure. So ideally we want a lower blood pressure. An average blood pressure is 120 over 80. If you want me to go into detail of what those numbers mean, I can definitely do that in another video. And then the last one is having to do with our physical body structure. So we can use, what makes up our body composition does play a role in our overall health. So the more fat we carry, the less healthy we are, but where we carry that fat actually plays a bigger role than just how much of it we have. So utilizing our waist to hip ratio can help us determine whether that fat distribution is healthier. By using that, so you would use a stretch resistant tape measure. So those typically, I think they're used for sewing, maybe, but those tape measures that you can roll up, those are perfect. You want to measure your waist at that midpoint between your last rib and the top of your hips. Depending on your body structure, that could be the same spot. I have a very short torso, so mine is pretty easy to determine. And then once you have that measurement, we want to then measure our hips at the widest part of our buttocks. And so when we do that, we want to make sure that our feet are close together and that our weight is evenly distributed. So we're just standing up nice and tall. Then you'll take those two numbers, so you have your waist to hip, so you can divide them, those two numbers, a healthy waist to hip ratio is anything less than 0.85 for women and then 0.9 for men. Anything above that is something that we want to look into and then potentially figure out ways to change that. These three measurements are things that you don't necessarily have to go to your doctor for and can give you a good indication of what your overall health is, both within our physical body composition as well as our internal cardiovascular health.